Hello. Nigeria has now moved a step closer to establishing state police after a bill seeking the amendment of the 1999 Constitution to allow states in the country set up their own police for a scaled second reading in the House of Representatives. The bill has been sponsored by the Deputy Speaker of the House, Benjamin Kalu, and 12 other lawmakers. Now, in the alteration to the Constitution under consideration, a commissioner of police appointed from among the 7 policemen in the state will head the proposed state police. Elucidating on the bill, the co-sponsor and member representing Ilorin West Asha Federal Constituency, Tolani Shagaya, further listed other key provisions of the bill to include the establishment of the State Police Service Commission as distinct from the Federal Police Service Commission with clearly defined roles and jurisdictions. A recalibration of the National Police Council to include the chairman of the State Police Service Commissions, emphasizing the collaborative and consultative nature of policing in the country's federal system. Now, other provisions are the recognition of possible financial challenges that may be faced by state police, which would require the federal government to provide grants or aid subject to the approval of the National Assembly, thus ensuring adequate resources for effective policing. Now, the proposed amendment also provides that the appointment of the State Commissioner of Police by the governor shall be on the recommendation of the Federal Police Service Commission and the State Assembly's approval. Shagaya added that in the past few years, the nation's collective security had been greatly challenged, noting that as a result, state police had become inevitable to augment the efforts of the federal government to make the country safe for its citizens. Now, let's provide some background to all of this. And joining me to discuss all of this further is Oke Epia, who is the Executive Director, Other Paper Nigeria. He joins us from Abuja. Okay, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Thanks a lot for your time. Now, I have your organization has done something. You tried to simplify everything about this bill so that people can actually understand. So you've done a slide on explaining everything about the state police bill, and that's what we plan to focus on. But let's just quickly run through that slide now so that our audience can actually see. This is a slide now prepared by Other Paper. Of course, this slide talks about the key elements of the bill, basically divided into 4. There you can see the specific sections of the Constitution that will be amended, the sponsors of the bill, you have the conditions of federal intervention, and then the issue of red flags that Other Paper now identified. Let's look at the key elements as broken down by Other Paper. There you have the joint responsibility of both the state and federal police. Well, you have transfers, joint responsibility now transfers policing from the exclusive to the concurrent legislative list, meaning that both the federal and 36 state governments will have distinct police services. And that's quite true because as we speak today, the Constitution has not been amended. Policing is actually in the exclusive legislative list, so not concurrent. It's only the federal government that has a responsibility for that. What the lawmakers are trying to do is to make sure to transfer it now from not just, yes, it's going to be in the exclusive list, but it's also going to be in the concurrent list as well in the Constitution, so that state governments can actually set up their own state police. In terms of coordination, it creates framework for cohesion, coordination, and uniform standards between the federal and state police. That's the second key element. The third key element, independence, prescribes safeguards against unwarranted interference by the federal police in state police affairs. Now, these are the key elements of the bill that is being debated now in the House of Representatives. It talks about the creation of State Police Commission as distinct from Federal Police Service Commission. So every state would be expected to have their own State Police Commission. It expands membership of the National Police Service Commission Council, now Police Service Council, sorry, to include chairman of State Police Service Commission. And the funding, which of course is a big talking point, it empowers the federal government to provide grants and aids to state police subject to national Assembly approval. So it's not as if funding is completely taken away from the federal government. Now, specific areas of the Constitution that will be altered, well, those are the sections 34, 35, 39, 42, 84, 89, 129, 153, 197, 214, 215, and 216. And then you have Chapter 6, Part 3, second schedule. You have Part 2 of the third schedule and Part 3 of the third schedule as well. Now, these are the areas that will need to be amended for us to have state police. That's areas of the Constitution or sections of the Constitution, if you like. Now, the key nomenclature changes, well, you have a replacement of the phrase Nigerian Police Force with the word police. It creates a federal police and then creates State Police Service Commission. The 10 red flags, and it's at this point that I think I'll have to bring in okay here. And okay, thank you very much for staying with us. And it's a wonderful job that your organization has done to give us this breakdown. Quite wonderful. But I want us to begin to talk about the red flags now. These red flags, what do you mean when you refer to some of these issues that you've highlighted, 10 of them as red flags?
Right, thank you, Adeji, first of all, for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. We are delighted to commend you for the great work that you do using your platforms. And we think that it's important that you avail us of this platform to engage with Nigerians on this very important bill, because we know that the National Assembly has advanced this bill to pass second reading. It will now be committed to the Committee on Constitutional Review for further legislative work, which would include at some point public hearing. So we thought at other paper that's important that the nitty-gritty, the fine details of this bill, like they say, the devil is in the details, are distilled and provided for public consumption or public engagements to enrich the consultative process that would lead to eventual passage of the bill by the National Assembly before it is cascaded to the 36 state houses of assembly and comes back for harmonization, sent to the president for assent. So it's quite a cumbersome process, but it's important that every stage of the way of this process, Nigerians are made to understand as granular as possible what is the details of this work that is being done. So that's why we took it upon ourselves, once we got hold of the bill, to distill it into these slides. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak to them. We think that really the conversation should be steered around what we have listed as red flags. Like
and this is quite key on the issue of appointment of police commissioners, the deputy commissioners, assistant commissioners by governors, based on the advice of the Federal Police Service Commission and confirmed by the State Assembly.
Yes, because if we, earlier on the slides, it spoke about independence of the state police as one of the elements, key elements of the bill. You know, but it's concerning that this may be constrained by this red flag that you have just, read out. Appointment of state police commissioner. Deputy commissioner and assistant commissioners by the governor based on the advice of the Federal Police Service Commission. So in other words, that independence the State Police Service Commission or the state police should enjoy thoroughly appears to have been, maybe arrested, maybe diluted by this provision. So it's a constraining factor on the independence, as it were, and that's not the only constraining factor on the independence of state police that this bill proposes.
And let's look at the next red flag now. Removal of state police commissioner by the governor based on the recommendations of the Federal Police Service Commission and subject to 2/3 majority approval by the State Assembly. So in this case now, the State Police Service Commission doesn't play any role at all.
The State Police Service Commission has a recommendation to make to the Federal Police Service Commission. And that is what the bill proposes. And we think that it is like conceding or ceding the powers, again, the independence of the state police to some level or measure of control, you know, of the federal police or the federal authorities. We think that's a red flag.
Why am I thinking that it's like this is just a duplication of the NJC? Because this is exactly how the NJC operates. I mean, when it comes to the appointment of judges, the dismissal of judges and all of that, you know, recommendations are made to the NJC, even though you have a state judicial council now, that they have to make. Is that what we're seeing here? Something similar?
I think so. And so that is why we need to thoroughly think this through. We need to make this public engagement as wide as possible, as inclusive as possible, so that some of these things, the conversations are deepened and the feedback are taken into account when the National Assembly is eventually passing the bill. Policing is a lot more different terrain when it comes to from the judiciary, so to speak, because I mean has to do with the life, the security of lives and property. And so if you subject policing control, you know, administration of policing to this level of bureaucracy, which we already complain of by the centralization of policing, and you reintroduce these elements into state policing, where are we making progress? You know, so it's a question that we need to thoroughly interrogate and be sure that we are not, you know, taking one step forward and two steps backward. Mind you, even the State Police Service Commission, this bill provides that there has to be a representation from the Federal Police Service Commission. You know, so you see the influence, you know, being woven from the federal, from the federal government into the state police. Yeah, it may be for checks and balances, but again, we need to be sure that these are the right measures to ensure checks.
All right, let's look at the other, the third red flag now. It says here that the Federal Police Service Commission shall recommend to the governor the discipline and removal of state police commissioners, deputy and assistant commissioners. Something similar to what, similar to the previous red flag now, right?
Yes, yes, it is. You know, because it doesn't say that the state government wholly depends on the state police commission to discipline or to approve the discipline of erring, you know, officers. So again, that function has been ceded, as it were, to the federal government, which again is the same thing. Are we making progress?
So you look at some of these provisions, you tend to get the impression that, hey, this is not completely an independent state police service, policing system that we're creating. It's still like, you know, a devolved federal policing system.
Precisely the case. You know, I think that we should go the whole hog if we want to practice, I mean, what is popularly referred to as true federalism. If we are devolving powers, we are separating powers between the tiers of government, we should be bold and courageous in doing that. Again, of course, it raises the more fundamental question of, is that what we really need sincerely? Does it appear popular? If it appears populist, is that a reason why we should be opting for state police currently? You know, given the fact that there are other elements of the political dynamics that needs to take shape before you can even actually implement any form of state policing, for instance. Because take a look at the bill, you see the state assemblies, they have roles to play. The state houses of assembly, they have been given clear roles to play, like the one we just read. Before this, there has to be approved by 2/3 members of the state houses of assembly for appointments, you know. But what do we have as state assemblies today? You and I know the story. Even when we've had a constitution amendment for financial autonomy for state houses of assembly in this country, that is not being implemented, the much I know, or fully implemented. So we still have a situation where state assemblies are virtually still in the pockets of governors. So you see that eventually, willy-nilly, the state governor still has that preponderant power to be able to determine, you know, who he wants without resistance or little check or no checks at all from the state house of assembly. So the point again is fundamental. Are we thoroughly implemented the current regime, that has been enhanced by constitutional amendments that we have had, one of which I just mentioned? Or because it is fanciful, we think that let's try this other one because it's
okay. Let's
no. We need to have the state assemblies become really autonomous before we can actually have a functional state police system. Otherwise, we'll have more powers given to the state governors to become demigods that they already are.
Okay, let's take a quick look now at the fourth one, that the State Police Commission to recommend the appointment, discipline, and removal of police. Of Commissioner Deputy and Assistant Commissioners to the federal. Of course, we've talked about that. But let's go to the financing, which of course is a big issue. Financing of state police, well, for you see this as a red flag. It's not adequately provided for, so that grants or aids from the federal government will not be sustainable. Can you expatiate more on that?
Yeah, the bill that we have worked on do not make explicit provisions for how state policing will be funded. The assumption is that each state government will have to go back and do that homework and find out the ways and means of how they would fund it. But again, there's also a provision in this bill that states that the National Assembly will legislate the framework and guidelines for state policing. So maybe that would come by another act of the National Assembly. But at this stage, it's important, we think, to highlight it as a red flag that, look, we need to be very careful and clear that there will be funding and sustainable funding for state policing. Otherwise, mere mention of grants and aids would not cut it, would not achieve the purpose that we want, given the very dire financial and fiscal straits of the country. You know the story about how states are, virtually on their knees, meeting up the obligations, as much as paying for recurrent services, salaries and all of that. And you want to add policing to that. There has to be clear, clearly defined means and ways by which that will be achieved. Otherwise, it would render state police ineffective or inoperative or inoperable. And which is one of the reasons, one of the reasons for which the federal government or the state police, the federal police rather, can intervene in the affairs of the state, because there are three of those conditions provided. One of which is that if there is an administrative, a financial, or other problem, the state police is unable to discharge its responsibility and contain, disorder, then the federal police will step in. So are we laying some kind of groundwork for that kind of thing to happen by not explicitly laying out the funding for state police? We thought it's important to highlight that as a red flag.
And of course, you tend to get the impression that when you bring in grants and aids from the federal government, it tends to create the impression that, look, for states that cannot fund their own state police, they would have to rely on grants from the federal government to fund their. So basically, the government will, this federal government will have to fund their own police. That's the impression one gets.
Yes, you are correct. So these are the kind of things that we need more clarity on.
Oh, okay. Let's look at the other red flags now. Conditional federal intervention in state policing must be approved by 2/3 majority of the Senate. What is wrong with that? How is that a red flag?
Conditional federal intervention in state policing. So I have mentioned just now that there are three conditions by which the federal police would intervene or can intervene in state policing. However, by giving some role to the National Assembly to be able to allow that to happen, we think that because security matters sometimes require very swift action, swift decision making, should be removed from politics and politicization as much as possible. So when you take matters to the National Assembly and you now require as much as 2/3 to get things going, that is not only increasing or extending the bureaucratization of the operations of state policing, but you're also bringing politics, the risk of politicizing the decisions, of such takeover becomes apparent. You know the story around how it's very difficult for the National Assembly to even intervene in clear cases where there are crises and state assemblies are not able to delay or perform their functions. The Constitution provides that the National Assembly takes over. But we don't see that happen because of politicization. So we must be careful not to bring politicization into the realm of policing if we are going this route of state police. So we think it's also a red flag to consider.
All right, let's just quickly run through the others because we're actually out of time. You have another conditional okay. The other one is National Assembly to legislate the framework and guidelines for the establishment of state police. There's no stated inputs now from state assemblies. You also have the State Police Commission to have representative of the federal government as a member. You've spoken on that. And that what happens to officers and personnel of the current Nigerian police force. And that is very key. Now, when you raise this question, basically you are saying, are we going to have these 400 and something thousand policemen as federal police, and then you're now going to have, you know, for states now, if it's 10,000, 20,000, what exactly were you trying to point out here?
Yes, so would you have a situation where you will give the options to current police officers to decide whether they want to go back to their home states to serve? You know, or you want to say, oh, they must all remain as federal police officers, and then you start a fresh recruitment, a entirely fresh setup at the state levels, where you may not have the risk of not having institutional memory or, you know, experience and expertise coming from this center. So I think that's an issue that this kind of process needs to be able to address. Important. Otherwise, it will be left to some administrative decision making.
We've had suggestions from some people, I don't know what you make of that, that rather than create state police, what the government should probably do is to ask every police personnel to go to their, just post them to their states of origin, their local government areas, deploy them to those areas, and not that way you're still able to address the problem rather than create 36 state police, you know, 36 state police, if you like.
Yeah, so that's the thing about you know, being able to exhaust the implementation, exhaust every element of implementation in the current regime. In the current regime, meaning what the Constitution provides, including the constitutional amendment I just mentioned, including community policing, you know, whatever name they call it. Have we fully implemented it? Don't forget the Police Act that was recently enacted, you know, provide for some form of these things. Have we thoroughly implemented them to be sure that they are not able to cure the ills of the current system? My advocacy is that we should, yes, consider options to stem urgently this insecurity tide in the country, but we should not go for options that appear populist, but not quite practical in providing solutions that will enable us to get out of this mess that we're in terms of security.
Well, there's no question at all that since this is a constitution amendment, it still has to go to the various states. The state assemblies would have to weigh in at some point. How do you see that process playing out?
Yes, again, this is where the very interesting and intricate political dynamics come into play. On the surface of it, or underneath the surface of it, what are the state governors thinking? Yeah. Are they aligning themselves to the provisions of these bills as it is? Are they in alignment with the presidency, the executive? What kind of conversations are ongoing? So if it appears that there is some convergence of interests, you know, political interests, it is likely that there would not be much challenges from the state assemblies. Mind you, I have stated before that the lack of implementation or effective implementation of granting financial autonomy and granting and allowing the state legislators to operate the way they should operate is a major disservice to this country. And so if that situation continues to exist, the state governors will just, it's a matter of more like instructions to the state assembly, say, this is what we want, you pass the bill. Don't forget that these are the same state assemblies that at some point, I think the constitutional amendment process in the 7th assembly also, state assemblies rejected, you know, quite ironically and ridiculously so, the amendment, the provision for them to have financial autonomy. The state assemblies rejected it. You know, so and you will know who was pulling the strings at that point in time. So the point, not much has changed. If the governors are in alignment with the political actors, the political establishment are in convergence on what they want to do, I do not see any much resistance or divergence from the state houses of assembly. And this is why we are calling on Nigerians to engage. We are inviting Nigerians not to overlook this process, not to be aloof, to participate. We have provided information in a granular manner as possible. Can we consume this information? Can we engage with our National Assembly members? Can we begin to engage with our state assemblies? Can we begin to talk about this in our WhatsApp groups? Can we begin to talk about this in our communities, in our homes, in our families, in our different town unions? Because if this goes wrong and they pull it through, we would not have solved the problem. I fear that would have escalated the problem of insecurity in the country.
Well, I'm afraid we just have to end the discussion there. Thank you very much for your time, and well done for the wonderful job you're doing. Executive Director of Order Paper, Okepia, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Deji. Appreciate that.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Appreciate it. All right, that's how much we can take on the program this week. See you again next week. Bye-bye.